Okay, so what I'd like to cover in this session is a brief explanation of how to graph your results from the oxygen consumption or O2 deficit DET lab. And so as a quick recap of this particular lab, what we had people do was either rest for a 5-minute period of time, then they got up and started either walking or jogging on the treadmill for a 5-minute period of time, and then there was a 5-minute period of time where we stopped the treadmill and the person sat back down again and rested and recovered for 5 minutes. We had 3 different subjects, one of whom walked on the treadmill at a slow walk, 2 miles an hour. We had a subject walk on the treadmill at a more brisk pace, 3.5 miles an hour. And then we had a subject jog or run on the treadmill at 5 miles an hour, representing a more intense exercise. And so under each of these, we've got the oxygen consumption measurements in relative oxygen consumption, which is mLs per kg per minute. Now, graphing this is pretty easy, but it has to make sure that the lab data is set up correctly. The most important thing for this type of graph is to make sure that instead of using these stage times, that we list a column with the total time of the test from 1 through 15 minutes. Then with each of the columns, we've got the VO2 for subject 1, we've got the VO2 for subject 2, and the oxygen consumption measures for subject 3. Okay, so this is pretty easy, and what we're going to do is insert a graph, but the easiest thing to do is to highlight all of the data that you want graphed first. And by setting up the data in this format, the first column that we're going to use is going to be the horizontal or x-axis, and then we're going to have the other 3 that will be plotted on the same graph. So if we just start here and highlight or select the entire area of our data, the total test time, the VO2 for subject 1, 2, and 3. And so we go to our tabs up here at the top, which will be Insert, and we scroll over from Insert, and you would think this would be a line graph, but actually the type of graph that we want to insert is a scatter plot, or as you can see from the description, an XY chart. And so we're going to have time in minutes on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, and the oxygen consumption for each of the subjects on the vertical or y-axis. So we select scatter. That gives us some different options here of types of scatter plots, and probably the best one to select is this one, which is it plots the data points with markers and then connects those data points with straight lines. And so if we select that type, it automatically generates our graph for us. And if you have selected entitled the columns correctly, we've also got the labels over here, so we can see in the blue color is subject number 1 at 2 miles an hour, and the red color is subject number 2 at 3.5 miles an hour, and subject number 3 is at 5 miles an hour. And so they're clearly labeled. And then we've got our x-axis down here at the bottom, which is minutes, our y-axis here, which is oxygen consumption. Okay, so we've got our basic graph done, and now what we can do is try to sort of improve or fancy this up a little bit. One of the things to create a little more graph space is we can move our, let's see, well, let's hold off on that for right now. Let's move that back, and let's just make this bigger so we can work with it. Now I'll show you some of the ways to clean up this graph a little bit. The first is we can expand our graph to make it a little more visible. If you click on one of the horizontal axis, you can see it highlights that horizontal axis. You right click and it brings up a menu, and we go to Format Axis. And you can see our axis it goes in minutes, and we really start with minute 1 and we go to minute 15, so we don't really need these extra 5 minutes out here on the end. So if we come up here, we can see axis options maximum was set on auto, but in fact we can click on fixed and change that to 15 minutes and click on close, and so that cuts off that extra 5 minutes and expands our graph and makes it a little bit easier to see. We can do the same thing on the vertical axis here, because we know that our maximum oxygen consumption is 29.6, so we could eliminate this top 5 mLs per kg per minute. So once again, you select the vertical axis, or in this case the vertical axis, you right click on it, come down here to format axis, and the maximum, instead of auto, we're going to click fixed, and instead of 35, we're going to delete that and put in 30, and we click on close, and then that further expands our graph. So the graph portion fills up the whole plot area. Okay, then to make this graph look nicer, we want to go ahead and add some data, some axis labels to it, so we know what these figures are down here. And in that case, if you see at the top, this tab up here, Chart Tools, has been highlighted. And what you want to do is, it's on design right now, and what we want to do is click on the sub-tab Layout, and then under sub-tab, this Layout tab, if we go back here to Axis Titles, you click the drop-down arrow, and first thing we want to do is the horizontal axis. Right now it's set on none, but we want to do a title, and we want to put it below the axis. So you click on that, and you can see it puts a text box in down here for axis title. If we go in here and highlight that axis title, and we can put test time, and that's in minutes, and then click outside the box, we now have our horizontal axis title. We can do the same thing for the vertical axis over here, because this is oxygen consumption, or VO2. So we go back to the top under axis titles, click the down arrow, go to vertical axis, and there's a couple of different ways we can do it. I think the best is to do this rotated title. So we click that, and it puts it rotated 90 degrees, and so it doesn't take up that much space. So once again, we can click in here. You can delete what's in there, and this is oxygen consumption, or VO2, and that's in mLs/kg/min for minutes. So that's oxygen consumption in mLs per kg per minute. So now we've got our nice graph drawn, and we've got axis titles for the horizontal axis and our axis over here for the vertical axis. Now, one of the things that we asked you to do for this lab was to label the 5-minute resting period, the 5-minute exercise period, and the 5-minute resting or recovery period. And it might not seem immediately intuitive how to do that, but it's actually pretty easy. And so if we go back over here, go to the top, right now we're in Chart Tools, and let's see, under Chart Tools we can select a text box. As you can see in the description, it inserts a text box that can be positioned anywhere on the page. So we select text box, and notice your cursor changes. And so what I'm going to do down here is you click, left click, and then drag to establish your text box. And so what I'm going to do with that one, that first text box is going to be rest. And I'm going to go back and highlight this, because we can see up here it's actually left justified in this box. And so I'm going to go up here to the top and center it, so that centers it in the box. Now what I'm going to do is right click on the box. Oops, let's see, that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to first click on, you got to go up here and click on like the outline part of the box. So that turns to a solid line, and then right click on it, and it says Format Object. And so that brings up this box, and let's see, we'll go to Line Color, Solid Line, Go down here to a color. Let's pick a color that'll really stand out, like this red, and click on close. And then when we unselect that box, you can see it gives a red line around the box that defines the rest period. Okay. Now we want to do a similar box for the exercise, the 5 minutes of the exercise, and another box for the 5 minutes of the resting or recovery. So what we can do is just click on this box, right click on it, copy, go into the plot area, right click, right click, and let's go up here to the far left and paste. So I'll paste it in there. Did that paste a copy of the box? Nope. Okay, so let's move that back here. So here's the other way you can do it. You can select it, hold down the control key, and you can see by the cursor it makes that little plus sign, and you can just drag it over here, and that makes a copy. And then we'll do it again. Click, left click, hold down the cursor, drag it over here, that'll make another copy. And then you can click on this one and backspace and say exercise, and click on this one. Oops. Do that, move something. Okay. Click in the box and delete all of that, and we'll call this recovery. Okay, and then we need to make sure that this one is dragged over and meets that, and this drags over to here. Okay, so we clearly have our a little bit. So that's it. Oh, and then actually recovery. I didn't get that over far enough. Let's get that all the way over to the 15. Okay, and so that specifies our rest, exercise, and recovery periods on the graph. Oh, here's the one we copied and pasted up here. It came up at the top. So let me delete that. And actually, it looks like I did it a couple of times. See if we can get rid of this thing. There we go. Okay, so that's how you graph your results for the oxygen consumption O2 deficit lab, so you can get all three results on the same graph, so you can see the differences in the pattern of oxygen consumption response at 3 different exercise intensities.